Hey guys, welcome back. My name's Emily,
I'm Greg.
and we're Telltale. Today we're going to do another book review on the book Ringworld by Larry Niven. Is that how you say it? Niven?
Yep.
Niven?
Niven.
I've never heard these names, so I
Oh.
only base them off of how I read them, and
That's
so
true.
I never know if I'm pronouncing them
But
right.
his is the same as David Niven.
Okay, I'm not connecting in my
Okay.
brain. Another recommendation I'm going to have to read. So yeah, Ringworld is a science fiction, kind of a classic one. It's towards the beginning of the popularization of science fiction, I should say. 70s, right? 1970s?
1969 is when it was
69,
released. It
almost
won
70s.
Hugo and Nebula Awards in 1970.
Okay, so it was more popularized in the 70s. This book was really fascinating because it's actually based off of a scientific possibility, a theory, but still highly possible. So,
Inspired by Freeman Dyson, who just died recently.
oh,
hmm
may he rest in peace.
Last week, I believe, was when he died,
He became stardust.
as we tape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the whole premise is Lewis. It's his 200th birthday. And after 200 years, he's kind of bored.
hmm
He's been this kind of guy who all his life has gone out into the far reaches of the galaxy, had adventures, come back to Earth, stays there a while, and then gets bored of it and wants to move on and go have another adventure. So at his birthday party, he meets a lovely young lady named Tila Brown, who ends up getting wrapped up in the same thing he gets wrapped up in when a two-headed alien named Nisus, or Nisus, either, I don't know how it's pronounced it once again, but Nisus comes and propositions him to say, hey, I can give you this really sweet spaceship that my people made in exchange for you coming along on this scientific expedition. And at first he's like, well, why do you want me to come and do this? And he's like, oh, because my culture is entirely based on cowardice. That is our primary philosophy. So I cannot go, like, I'll come with you, but none of my other people want to come with me, so I need some people who are much braver than myself. That's basically the whole premise of it.
hmm
So Nisus recruits Lewis, Tila Brown to come with them, and a creature named Speakers to Animals, who is from a species that is kind of a war species.
hmm
They are very violent, and they swear a lot, and they are just really they're a war culture.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting social dynamic in this story. So they all pack into a spaceship and kind of get briefed on what they're doing and what the expedition is, and then they go off and see that some culture in the far reaches of of one of the galaxies has built a planet that, instead of orbiting around a sun as an orb, it is a ring that orbits around a sun. And it has so much surface area, it can take care of multiple population problems. It is highly possible that if people exist on this ring world, as they call it, on one side, it is entirely possible they've never met anybody on the other side.
hmm
It is just so vast and massive, and they have no idea who built it. And then they get there, and it's populated.
hmm
And the population has no idea who built it either. So they're kind of...
civilization has fallen.
Yeah, the whole civilization's gone through like this post-apocalyptic kind of situation where they're just as clueless as everybody else as to what happened in the past. So they're just kind of living in a tribal existence right now. So these four, and in their spaceship, decide to kind of explore it, try to figure out what they can figure out about this planet, and end up having some crazy adventures. It was really a fun read.
Mhm.
I enjoyed it a lot because it had some really great humor, some really quirky, funny, like, alien-related interactions where it's like, you must be kidding, I never kid, kind of stuff, especially with Speakers to Animals. He's a really kind of funny character because he's so dry and so serious and so violent, and everybody's like, you're kidding, and he's like, I never kid, kind of thing. really interesting world building again. You know, all know I'm a sucker for world building. This is a fascinating world building scenario, especially because it could potentially happen if we had the means to build a ring world. It could sustain life.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really interesting. There are some like one of my favorite things, which seems really far-fetched, and at first I was like, that's kind of a dumb idea. Like, at first I didn't like it. But the more I thought about it, the more interesting and intriguing it became to me, is that one of the reasons Nisis's culture actually chose Tila Brown to come on the trip is because she was specifically bred to be lucky.
Yep.
You find out later in the book, spoiler alert, that Nisis's culture has really interfered severely with basically like genetic engineering.
Mm-hmm.
He actually, Speaker to Animals is from a really war-torn, very warlike culture, but he's actually the milder of his culture because Nisis's culture, because they're so cowardly, found this really strong culture that could potentially do a lot of their bidding and systematically made them to become less and less violent, but still violent, enough to be manipulated.
Yeah.
So they've systematically destroyed that culture, built a new one with what was left, and kind of did the same thing to humans, because human population on Earth in this storyline kind of goes from... I mean, it explodes. After several thousand years, there's not enough landmass to sustain people, so people have to be put on a lottery in order to be able to be given permission to reproduce, essentially. But that lottery was entirely kind of finagled with by Nisis's culture, where they started trying to see if they could breed people who were lucky, because humanity already had technological advancement. They already had a pretty ideal genetic stance, biologically speaking. The only thing they had left really to consider was, let's see if we can make this culture more lucky.
Yeah.
So through this lottery system, they were able to manipulate the numbers to find luckier and luckier people to see if they could potentially make a really lucky human. And Tila Brown ends up being that really lucky human. Because by the point she gets on Ringworld, she's having a really rude awakening, because she gets hurt for the first time. She's never been injured. She's never been sick. She's never been heartbroken. Nothing has ever hurt her or touched her in a way that made her deal with a struggle, because she's been so lucky. But then she ends up being lucky enough to get onto Ringworld, and then lucky enough to experience those things for the first time, and eventually lucky enough to become an inhabitant of Ringworld. So it's kind of interesting how they develop the philosophy around that luck, and how the team kind of starts rationalizing things differently when they start realizing that Tila was the lucky member of the group, because there's several situations in this book where she should have died. Yeah. Straight up. She was a moron. She did something stupid because she's never been hurt before, so why should she think anything bad would happen? And in several occasions, she almost dies. But, yeah, so really entertaining and original ideas, really fascinating science behind this, really well explained. So I felt like there wasn't a single part of this book where I was super lost. Yeah. Which can sometimes happen when people get involved in sci-fi, especially if it's something really outside the realm of what they're used to in sci-fi. This book did a really great job of developing all these philosophies and really explaining all these theories to you, so you really understand what's going on and understand how it actually could happen were we to have the technology and the resources in general to be able to create a ring world. So it was just a really, really fun sci-fi read. Yeah. And I think it's good for a lot of different age groups. It is more young adult to adult, with some sexual situations and things like that in it, and of course there is some mild language, but for the most part, it was a really enjoyable read. I liked it a lot. How about you?
I loved it. I read this. This is one of the earliest science fiction books I read way back in 1979, and it blew me away back then. And I just recently reread it so that we could do this review, and it's blowing me away once again. I'm finding things about it that really didn't click into me when I was a teenager. That just like the story's really about Tila, not about Ringworld, not about Louis Wu. It's really about Tila and her luck. The novel, it's part of a whole series, but it wasn't originally written to be a series. But the one weakness about this book being written as a standalone book is that it just doesn't. Ringworld is huge. There's a million stories that could be told here. And so Niven has these people go to the Ringworld, but they accidentally crash on it, and the rest of the novel is just all about them trying to get off. And so they really just kind of went there and left. And you see a little bit about the Ringworld along the way, but there's so much more that could be talked about, which is why Niven eventually gave into the pressure of fans to write more Ringworld stories and tell more about, why did this place get created? What happened to the people who built it? And all the other things that are going on. Where are the puppeteers really going? Why are the puppeteers really interested in Ringworld? And there's another race, I forget what they're called, the Outsiders or something. What are they? How are they related to this Ringworld? How does that all tie together? And so Niven eventually did write quite a few more books about Ringworld. But at first he just wrote this and intended it to be a single story, but the Ringworld is just a place to make the story happen. The real story is about the luck of Tila Brown. And it is still an extremely fascinating book, even though it could be 5 times the size it is if he would have went into a lot more detail and a lot more adventure on this world. But I still love it. It's a great book.
Yeah, and that is kind of the hard part with it being a standalone, is that you do end up having a lot more questions than answers. But it's funny how, now that you mention it, that's kind of how a lot of book series, some of the greatest book series even started. Like when you think about Tolkien, Hobbit was supposed to be its own little story.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, Lord of the Rings, Silmarillion, all because of peer pressure where the cries of the people needed to be heard. And they wanted more of Bilbo and more of his family and more of adventures with the hobbits and stuff. So Niven kind of was caught in the same situation where he wrote a great story and people wanted more answers to the questions. So they were he heard the cries of the people and did so. And the characters are so memorable in this. They are really well described. Like Nisus is this 2-headed being who can... You find out later that even though he's a coward, they have this really cool defense where his legs are so powerful, he literally kicks a guy's heart out through his spine. Like, that's just the coolest thing ever. Like, if I want to be able to do that to defend myself. But it's really funny because in his culture, nobody else would have known that. Because they're all so cowardly, right. They would have never gotten in a situation where they had to. But for some reason, he got in a situation where he had to and just kicked the heart right out of a dude. And then, of course, Speaker to Animals is just this giant, orange, fluffy thing. And he looks so snuggly and looks like you should be able to hug him, but he'll kill ya. He will definitely kill ya. So, it's just kind of funny how the alien species kind of are twisted that way, where big warrior-based culture looks like an orange kitty that you could just pet. And then Nisus, who's this cowardly being, can kick a heart out of a man through his spine. But yeah, really, really interesting characters, very memorable.
Yeah, and the humor is one of the great things about the book. The whole book is written in a very lighthearted tone. It doesn't ever take itself too seriously, and there's a lot of funny moments, and it's just enjoyable in every moment of it.
Yeah. One of the things, too, that I thought was very interesting is, so I kept thinking about children and how Tila Brown is kind of this really naive, unhurt, unscathed human. And you kind of get frustrated with Lewis a little bit, at least I did, because he keeps describing her like she's a child, and he's like, she's being stupid and what a dumb woman and all this stuff. But in our society, we do the same thing to children, where we want to protect them from things and protect their innocence, but scold them for it at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I found that very frustrating. I find the same thing with parents who do the same thing to their kids very frustrating as well. But it's kind of, that was the only thing in the book that I had a hard time with, was when he had those moments of kind of scolding her for her naivety, but at the same time admiring it and being fascinated with it. And it's just like, well, then shut up. Why are you scolding her for it? That's her superpower, basically, is being extremely lucky. She's like Domino.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but he had to learn that through the course of the story. That was his growth, to go from somebody that was looking at her as this dumb kid, because he's 200 and she's 20, to finding out that she's the most important person on that whole expedition.
Yeah. So and I think it was a little humbling for him too, because Lewis is kind of a cocky guy. Like, he's done a lot of stuff. Yeah, he's done a lot of stuff, and he knows a lot of shit, but he thinks very highly of himself, which is another thing I had a harder time with. Overall, though, you kind of need it in the story to perpetuate the storyline. So it was done very artistically. While frustrating, it kept things interesting.
Yeah.
You needed him to mix things up every once in a while. Or to be the guy who's like, hey, I just realized such and such about you, and not be filtered about it. Puts his foot in his mouth a few times, but yeah, it's a good one. Highly recommend it.
Definitely.
So yeah, anything else?
No, and I didn't even think about getting a quote out of this book. But there isn't any of those great philosophical quotes. It's just a good story all the way through that you just enjoy.
Oh, I just opened to a good one.
Okay, go for it.
Here's a good one. You meddled with the fertility laws of Earth? Yes. Why? We like humans. We trust humans. We have dealt profitably with humans. It is to our advantage to encourage humans, since they will certainly reach the lesser cloud before we do. The lesser cloud is the Armageddon that's coming. Wonderful. So you like us. So, we sought to improve you genetically, but what should we improve? Not your intelligence. Intelligence is not your great strength, nor is your sense of self-preservation, nor your durability, nor your fightless talents. So you decided to make us lucky, said Lewis, and he began to laugh. That's actually I'd have to say one of my favorite quotes from this.
Yeah.
I can't believe I just happened to open to it. That was my favorite part, was when they figured that out. And they figured out Nessus's culture was trying to make them lucky. So yeah, that explained it really well. Yeah. So, great read. Highly recommend.
Recommend that, and recommend the rest of the series too. The rest of the books are good to this.
Yeah, I intend to read the rest of the series because I have a lot of questions that I want answered. So, it's a good one. Highly recommend it.
Okay.
Well, thanks for joining us, guys.
See you next Friday.
Have a good one.